I love doing these type of videos. I'm going to show you 10 different games on 10 different consoles. So if you really like the NES or Nintendo 64, maybe you'll see a game you hadn't played yet. Or if you've always been about Sega Genesis but never got as far back as Atari, or maybe even really played a whole lot of NES games, maybe you'll find something that's like, ooh, actually, I gotta check that out too. I am my own video sponsor. I make video games. I also make custom air fresheners. This Star Tropical smells like pina colada and jungle. I sell these in my online shop. Check out a link in the description below. And thank you so much for subscribing. It really means a lot to me. I appreciate you. Starting this video off for the Game Boy Advance, Wade Hickson's Counter Punch. Now this game was recommended to me by my buddy Reggie, the radical one, and he was like, yo, this game, he didn't actually say the word yo, but he said, this game is a cartoony version of like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Now, as we've seen in the past, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, basically the best boxing game of all time. And so many boxing games along the way haven't filled that void, but this one is probably the best of those. It gives you that behind the view, big characters that you're boxing on this one, and it's that same idea where you can either like punch them or you can wait for them to attack and then dodge, and that'll make them open so then you can hit them back and everything. Great characters in this one, great graphics. I think it plays really well. This is for the Game Boy Advance. It's called Wade Hickson's Counter Punch. I would definitely recommend checking this out. I think it's a lot of fun. For the Super Nintendo, we have Natsume Championship Wrestling. Now, if you're a big wrestling fan like I am, you always look out for the WWF games or the WCW games. And then, like, the non-licensed wrestling games, you check them out, and sometimes they can be pretty good, but then sometimes you're just like, well, it's just kind of made up with made-up characters or whatever. This game in Japan is All Japan Pro Wrestling, so characters like Giant Baba, Misawa, Kawada, those people came from All Japan Pro Wrestling, Stan Hansen, Dr. Death, all these great wrestlers. Now, instead of it being licensed by All Japan Pro Wrestling, in the US, they just called it Natsume Championship Wrestling. It was made by Natsume in Japan, and this one they kind of generified it. So yes, you still kind of play as those characters or those wrestlers, but differently. Now, the beautiful thing is the control method. It controls like the Fire Pro Wrestling series, where you have like your run button, and then your weak, medium, strong, and then grapple, and then as soon as you lock up, that's when you hit your button, or along with a direction and a button, and you'll do a different maneuver. It's a lot of fun, and one of the best wrestling games. Is it the best wrestling game for the Super Nintendo? In my opinion, it may be. I'd have to think about it, but it's really high up there. I believe it's available on the Nintendo Switch online for Super Nintendo, so you would always check it out on that too. But if you're looking for a loose cart, it doesn't go for very much. For the Sega Genesis, the Scooby-Doo Mysteries. Now, this features 2 games in one. Both of them are Scooby-Doo games, and this one, unlike the Super Nintendo one, is a not text adventure, but it's that Maniac Mansion style of game. And I know Maniac Mansion wasn't the first one to do this, but I think that just tells the story more than anything. You still walk around with your D-pad, but then you can look at something, take something, use this, on that. It's that style of game. Talk to people. Use, there's different things you can ask, different things you can talk about. I love games like this. I've always had a fond fascination with games like this, and Scooby-Doo Mysteries was very good. I remember renting this at least a couple of times. And the beautiful thing is, again, there are 2 different stories. So it's not just like, you know, here's the game and go through it and congratulations, you're done. There's 2 different games on here. Like, as soon as you pop it in, it lets you choose which one of these you want to play, and both of them are this style of game here. Taking it all the way back to the classic with an update of a classic, which is Kung Fu Master. Now, you probably played Kung Fu, the black box title, for your NES. And this is Kung Fu Masters. It was originally called Kung Fu Master in the arcade, and this is the Game Boy version. So it's Kung Fu. Don't get it twisted. It's still Kung Fu, where you gotta punch and kick and make sure the guys aren't just like grappling onto you. You know, that's one way to go. But, you know, it gives it a little bit more graphics, a little bit more story. You're actually outside instead of in the pagoda? What, like the little temple that you were in? In the NES one. Not a whole lot you need to talk about with a game like Kung Fu Master for the Game Boy, but, you know, it's one of those games that might be worth checking out. There's a lot of great Game Boy games out there. There's so many of them, but man, it's hard to cycle through them. And this one's something a little bit more familiar for you. Mindle Palace was a game I recommended to Dr. Scott recently at the Cleveland Gaming Classic. Mindle Palace from Game Freak, so the people who brought you Pokemon also brought you this. Now, when I ranked my Hudson Soft games, I gave this one actually kind of a lower score because I didn't quite get it. It was actually my buddy Ken who said, "Oh, you gotta play all the way through it. Like, don't just test it and try it and be like, okay, I'm done. Like, actually go through it, and I think you'll like it." And turns out he was right. And now it's funny. It's one of my favorite NES games that I had zero nostalgia for growing up because I never played it when I was growing up. And those NES games are few and far between. from ones I love that have zero nostalgia. Different enemies on each stage. And again, as you're looking at the footage, it's like you're shuffling cards and you're making them smash into the walls, and that's how you defeat them. The answer is yes. That is exactly how you defeat them. But there's so much more going on than that. Like when you're playing these games in the later levels and everything, where some of the cards tile over and then like more enemies appear because of that. So you have to, there's some strategy in there too. I think it's a lot of fun, man. And and there's a boss on every stage too, or at the end of every world rather. It's great game. Again, it might look a little confusing from this gameplay footage, but seriously, it's frustrating, but it's also a lot of fun.
So my favorite console of all time, hands down, is the PlayStation 2. I mean, the thing sold over 155 million units worldwide and is the greatest selling console in history. And with that comes great responsibility. There are a ton of PlayStation 2 games that are beloved by many. Millions of people have played these games, whether you're talking God of War or Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Devil May Cry, Resident Evil. But then there are the lesser known titles, the hidden gems, the ones that not many people played, the ones with low print runs that I think everybody should at least give a chance to once. And honestly, if you're a fan of survival horror games, which in my opinion, the PlayStation 2 is the greatest console for that genre, then you have to play at least once Kuon. Now, Kuon happens to be the most expensive and rare PlayStation 2 game in existence. Yes, it has finally surpassed Rule of Rose, but this game is absolutely fantastic. It is so much fun. And a little fun fact, it is actually created and developed by From Software, the same team that created Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, Sekiro, you name it. Yes, From Software was making games before Dark Souls. So this game had an extremely low print run, and honestly I can't even find a solid number of how many were actually released worldwide, but it wasn't many. So this game definitely flew under the radar to a lot of people, and not many people have ever played it or even heard of it. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it is a fantastic survival horror game. So if you're a fan of games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, Fatal Frame, Clock Tower, I mean, this is definitely a must play on anybody's PlayStation 2 list. So this game takes place in ancient Japan, where you can play as two playable characters going through a haunted mansion. And in that haunted mansion, you will come across some of the craziest, creepiest, evil-looking things you've ever seen as far as monsters and spirits and creatures go. It's absolutely amazing, and it just has such an eerie, creepy atmosphere. This game takes inspiration from Japanese folklore, and you get to play as two playable characters, Utsuki and Sakuya, with their own storylines each, which is really cool, so replayability on this game is awesome. With the combat, there is melee combat, there are spells that you can learn to take down your enemies, and the puzzles are pretty cool. I definitely think that this is a hidden gem when it comes to survival horror games on the PlayStation 2, and it is definitely worth checking out. If you're into survival horror and Japanese folklore and feudal Japan and that type of stuff creeps you out and is right up your alley, Kuon is definitely one that you should play at least once. Thank you, John, for having me on and letting me recommend a game to you and your audience. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you guys get a chance to check Kuon out because I definitely think it's worth playing. Yes, it is expensive, but if you can find a way to try this game out, highly recommend it. Back to you, John.
Yeah, maybe check out Wrecked Wizard's channel and maybe even drop him a subscription. I think he's pretty cool. Knife Edge Nose Gunner for the Nintendo 64. This is a game I kind of liked back then, but back then, no one really heard of it or didn't play it or didn't rent it or something like that. I thought it was okay. It was an on-rail shooter. I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day. It doesn't matter that you're a helicopter, but it's, really, it's just an on-rail shooter. And for the 64, as much as I'm kind of wishy-washy on the Nintendo 64, there are so many racing games, first-person shooters, 3D platformers. It was kind of fun to see a different style of game, and then see something like this, play as a helicopter going through. Really, again, doesn't matter. You play as the role of the target within this on-rail shooter, shooting the other guys and everything like that. It's a Nintendo 64 game that not a lot of people are really talking about, so might be worth checking out for you. So while some games are really great with no nostalgia, then there are games like Tailspin for the TurboGrafx-16, which are not really great, but for me are full of nostalgia. Now, I purchased this game as soon as it came out for the TurboGrafx-16. And when I played it back then, and I've always said on this channel, I love to say it, that the Disney games are usually pretty good. This one, I think a lot of people will argue that statement. But I still love this game. I can't explain why. I think it's because it was the time, it was the whatever. Tailspin, one of my favorite Disney afternoon cartoons of the lineup with DuckTales and Rescue Rangers and everything else. When Tailspin came out, Tailspin was my favorite for a long time. And when it came out for the TurboGrafx 16, again, man, pretty simple by nature, little platform, you're throwing coconuts, different levels have you throwing different things too, depending on which level you go to or which stage you go to. I thought it was great. In retrospect, not as much. The game didn't age very well, but I still have a lot of fond memories playing Tailspin for the TurboGrafx 16. So if you're looking for a new TurboGrafx 16 to play, maybe you have the Analog Duo or something like that, play this one for me, would you? For the PlayStation 1, let's check out Test Drive Off-Road. Now, funny thing about this is I didn't play it during the days of the PlayStation 1. I didn't play a whole lot of racing games. I loved Wipeout, I loved Ridge Racer, that's about it. So, I hosted a panel at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo with Ted Takuichi. He was one of the guys, one of the programmers, one of the developers, one of the something behind this game to make this game happen. He is the reason this game even exists in the first place on the PlayStation 1, and I moderated his panel. He did all the talking, I just fed him questions to find out the story. And the more he talked about this game, the more I was interested in playing this game. Now, I did play this game leading into the panel, so I could be a little bit more caught up and ask him about questions. The fact that it had licensed music, the fact that it had licensed vehicles. It wasn't just, you know, fictional vehicles or anything. You're actually playing as a Hummer, back when Hummers were popular. You're actually playing as an actual licensed Jeep and truck. I mean, all these things, all these licenses in one game. And with the PlayStation and its capabilities, there's actually hills. You can actually go up and down and stuff like that too, where before racing games were pretty flat, you know what I mean? So the more he talked about it and the passion behind it, it made me love that game even more. And so this is a game I didn't play it back in the day, but Test Drive Off-Road, the first one, he was the reason behind it. Again, he went to bat for the companies and put his job on the line, saying, this is how we have to have this game like this, or I'm out. And they made the game, and it was perfect, and apparently it worked because they ended up making a whole bunch more Test Drive Off-Road games after they let him go, of course. That's the gaming industry in a nutshell right there, right? but again, hearing his passion behind this game, and what a wonderful panel we had too. It was after the fire alarm, so not a whole lot of people were there, but it was recorded, so that's good news. And one of my all-time favorite arcade games from Sega, Congo Bongo. Now, make no qualms about it, Congo Bongo was Sega's answer to Donkey Kong. It came out in 1983. Now, this game, however, I think plays really well on the Atari 2600, believe it or not. What I'm showing you now is the Atari 2600 version. There are other versions of this. And again, I do love me some Congo Bongo. Like Donkey Kong, but a little bit more isometric, where you still have to climb to the top and, you know, to get to the guy who keeps moving and then opens up new stages. More stages in the arcade than there are on the Atari 2600, but if you have an Atari 2600, or maybe you have the new 2600 Plus, 7800 Plus, or something like that, that plays Atari games, classic games, you'll find this one pretty cheap, I think. And again, I think it's a lot of fun. Only a couple stages on this one. Again, more stages in the arcade, but if you're looking for Atari 2600 games, this is one I would recommend. Congo Bongo. Don't forget it. Now, this is my 11th or 12th one of these videos, so I've already done a bunch more. You can binge those as well, and you'll get all these recommendations for all these classic consoles, from Atari 2600 all the way through, again, like PlayStation 2, even Xbox on a couple of recommendations. Me personally, I'm more cartridge-based, so I'm all like NES, Genesis, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, things like that, but you can get a lot of great ideas with videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll do more coming up soon.